Right.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dan Hall. If I have to explain what an anomaly is, I sometimes think of it as being an interesting side road that we take. And one of the side roads that I've been interested in as somebody who's kind of into ufology has been Rendlesham Forest. And we're very fortunate to have with us somebody who's stationed at one of the Air Force bases in Rendlesham Forest, Lori Rehfeldt and
Rehfeldt.
Royfelt. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Thanks for correcting me.
Absolutely.
How about I just call you Lori? That way I won't screw up your last name.
Excellent.
Okay. So, and we're reminding people who are listening to this to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's always helpful. So, Lori, let's start with this. How did you get to England in 1980? You were in the Air Force, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually I graduated high school in 1977, and I was actually planning on going to the School of Visual Arts in New
Hmm.
York City. The only problem was they didn't have dormitories, and it was just I couldn't afford actually the logistics of getting there and back. And I knew that my father was no longer going to pay child support for me. So I was just brainstorming, and I remembered this girl in English class who had all these brochures from the military. So
Hmm.
I thought, well, maybe I should check it out. But this is just a few years after the Vietnam War and conflict, and I had no desire to go in the Marines or the Army because I was just thinking I don't want people shooting at me. I had I had no idea. I had no idea. I've never seen the military base or anything. I mean, the closest I got to a military base was watching the TV show MASH. And I thought,
Yeah.
boy, they're having a lot of fun, you know?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So so anyway, I said, well, I think I'll just check out the Air Force. That one seemed kind of nicer than the others, and I would have tried the Navy, except I got seasick on a ferry on the
Yeah,
way to
that would be a
Statue of
good
Liberty.
choice. Yeah.
I know. So so anyway, I enlisted in the Air Force. My mom was really worried about it, but she finally, she was okay about it. I they you end up going to I had to go to Fort Hamilton, and they did the physical and all that stuff, and then they offered me the job, and the job they offered me was inventory management. And I said, I don't want to work. I don't want to work in a in the back of a store or something. I don't I it did not appeal to me at all. And so the recruiter said to me, well, we'll find a job for you, and if you don't like it, you can say goodbye to the Air Force. And
Hmm.
I had been up early that morning, and again, not anywhere around military people. So I kind of talked back to him. I said, fine. So I'm like, I think I'm almost done with this. So he called me a few days later, and he said, well, what do you think about law enforcement specialists?
Hmm.
First thought that went through my mind was Charlie's Angels and uh, uh, Starsky and Hutch.
Starsky and Hutch, right?
Yeah, the detective shows that were popular back then. I thought, oh, that would be so much fun. So I was really excited. It was like my future was set. I was now on delayed enlistment. I was going to start January 23rd, 1978. So I got there. Basic training was really easy. It was almost embarrassing because they quarantined us because I think it was the Russian flu hit the base hard. So we weren't allowed to exercise that much. So by the time I got done with basic training, I wasn't in, well, I lost some weight a little bit. But anyway, from there, I went to my technical school, which happened to also be at the same base, Lackland Air Force Base. So I was the only one in my whole flight who did not go get on another airplane to go to their next assignment. So I spent 5 weeks there. So 6 weeks basic training, 5 weeks law enforcement. Then I put in for my dream sheet, and they said put what any place you want to go where you'd like to go. So I wrote down England was my first choice, and I don't even remember what the other choices were. But so we got to the end of tech school, and they were about ready to give us our orders of where we were going, and I was really kind of nervous about it at that point. Oh my God, what if they send me someplace I don't know? So they asked for anyone who wanted to volunteer to be a dog handler.
Hmm.
And like I said, we didn't do any real exercise in the basic training. So when they told us to go double time march, I thought that meant walk a little bit faster. I thought maybe walking was single time and double time was walking really
Uh-huh.
fast. And all these guys were running bat out of hell. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm doing this wrong. So I did not get selected for uh, to become a dog handler.
Hmm.
So, but that was okay. And I went back into this auditorium and they handed me my orders, and it said on it RAF Bentwaters. And
Mhm.
I'm like, RAF Bentwaters, what's that? And
Yeah, what the
somebody
hell
said,
is that?
yeah, oh, and then it said UK on the end of it. And I had no idea what UK was.
Mhm.
Geography, I was 18. I guess my geography lesson wasn't as good. I would have called it England or Great Britain, but United Kingdom, it just
Right.
wasn't on the list in my mind. So I finally asked somebody, where am I going? And they finally said, you're going to England. I said, oh, well, why didn't they put it on there? So I was like so excited. I called my mom and told her I got my assignment. I'm going to England. And then my grandma at the time was living in Ireland. She was born and
Hmm.
raised in Ireland. So I thought that'll be great because then I can go visit her,
Right. Right.
you know. So all was great. I mean, from that point, it was great. And then I get to England. We land at Mildenhall, RAF Mildenhall, and that's a show. That was like a showcase base. It was just nice. Then when I got to Bentwaters, as soon as I got there, I felt like something was off. I mean, this is a big part of my book too. Something was off. There was a heavy weight about the atmosphere of the place. I just couldn't shake it. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these Quonset huts, and I feel like I think I want to go back to Mildenhall. I mean,
Hmm.
that was literally my first thought. Interestingly, that's the first thought of a lot of people when they first get to England or get to Bentwaters.
So
Um,
one thing you might do, because I don't think people will understand this, what was an American soldier, Air Force person doing at a British base in England?
well, apparently the United States leased those two bases. And what's interesting, another thing is over in England, they have twin bases. So you don't just work at just Bentwaters. In our case, we worked at RAF Woodbridge, which
Okay.
was closer to Rendlesham Forest. And so so we leased it after World War II. And yeah, so I thought, so that's why, I mean, we had a presence because of the Cold War
Hmm.
of being at these different places, which I thought was great, because I got to go to some really nice assignments after I left England. But so when I got there, first thing met with my sponsor who said, "Welcome to Cripple Creek." I'm like,
Hmm.
Cripple Creek. I'm like, no, this is Royal Air Force, Bentwaters. And and I was thinking, oh man, this is not going well. And and then a few just not long after I had to go into training and to go over everything that I learned in technical school. And then I was put on B flight, Bravo flight. So in the Air Force, the let me say, the Army has platoons, the Air
Mm-hmm.
Force has flights.
Flights.
So
Okay.
so if I say a flight, doesn't mean I'm getting on an airplane.
Okay.
Um, we have squadrons. They have what's in one above the platoon. The can't even think of it now. But anyway, company. That's what the Army would have. So I even got onto Bravo flight, and I just had the whole time I'm still feeling this heaviness, like something was off, something's wrong. There's something about this place. It's just it was really affecting me, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and then so the first year was kind of rough. A lot of the guys, you know, I mean, I was told things like I should be barefoot and pregnant, and I said no. I said
No thanks, huh?
I'm only 18 and I have to get married before I do something like that.
Yeah.
So I was very naive in many ways, but I also realized I had to really protect myself. So um, a lot of times I mean, here's another thing that was interesting is that in the entire base, there was only one floor which had about maybe no more than 10 rooms. So two people in each room. So you're talking about there were about 20 women who were enlisted who lived in dormitories compared to there were a couple of hundred guys that lived in all the other
Mm-hmm.
dormitories, all three floors. So and at that time I did not live with my squadron, or so that also kind of it isolated me from
Right.
everybody. I would see them at work, but other than that, I didn't really see them as much. And so I really missed out on that camaraderie that a lot of them went had. So so then as the time went on, I got more comfortable. I was feeling confident. I was doing the patrol. It was there I learned about gate guards, and I would have written my recruiter and I said, if I knew about gate guards was part of law enforcement, I would have said, no way, give me inventory management.
Tell us what a gate guard did. What
What's
was
that?
their job? Tell us what a gate guard did. What was their job?
We were, technically, especially when you first start out in law enforcement, your title is really, they tell you you're a law enforcement specialist, but your title is entry controller. So
Hmm.
what you're doing is you're actually, controlling the traffic coming onto the base and, checking IDs, making sure their lights are working, stop them if you suspect they're, drinking and driving or whatnot. And but for the most part, working and the hours that we worked three swings and three mids. So we'd work from 4 to 12 for 3 days. It was longer than that because that doesn't include, the guard mount, and that's just the core time that you're actually on the gate. So it's usually about 10 hours. Um, and then we would have a 24-hour break. And then from there, we would go onto the midnight shift. So we'd be out on post at 12 midnight to 8 in the morning. And and there were a lot of adjustments we had to do. I mean, we were allowed to bring a radio for music. at the gate check. But the thing is, you had to have cassettes because at that time the the radio ended about 12. So after that, there was just static on the radio. And it's like, what do you mean,
Hmm.
no music? So, and so music was really important. The other thing is there was a television set. They only had three channels when we were there, BBC, ITV, so I missed out on a lot of things that were happening during that time. I guess like Mork and Mindy was new,
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
and so there were a lot of things that I didn't know what was going on in the US. But then on the other hand, I knew a lot of, I felt like England was so cutting edge in regard to the music and, just their style, everything like that. I would go on weekends and sometimes I'd go by myself. Well, if you work three swing, three mid, then you're on a 3-day break. So you get off the midnight shift at 8 in the morning and you're on break. And all you want to do is sleep. So what you have to
Hmm.
do is you have to get on a train or something like that to go to London to keep yourself awake so that you could go to sleep at a regular hour. And so so I got to go to London and do a lot of things. Um, but while I was working on Bravo Flight, I started, I was telling you about the heaviness that I was feeling, and then
Hmm.
um, it was I would go over by this one gate. They called it Ivy Lodge Gate, and I had to when we were on patrol, we had building checklists. So we had to go check certain things. But there was this one area, and it was I felt my intuition and stuff is really, really, really through the roof. And I felt this really bad vibe that there was a creature or something on the other side of the fence.
Really?
Yeah, and I knew, without knowing, I knew that there was a pond, and I was thinking that this person may have drowned or something like that, and a long time ago. And and he was just kind of being like taunting, crazy. And I would have to get out of my truck to go check the lock because sometimes the supervisor would put a note behind the lock. And so that's how he would know if you checked the lock or not. And so I'd get out, I'd get back in the car. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck. And
Hmm.
it happened quite a bit. And it wasn't until I went on Google Earth because it was all shrubs, overgrown. You couldn't see anything on both sides if you were off base or even on base because I stopped to check. I couldn't see anything when I was off duty. And but with Google Earth, sure enough, there was a pond there. And I'm thinking,
Hmm.
it validated what I experienced and doing research, I found out that Rendlesham Hall, which was connected with Ivy Lodge Gate, that was, I think, the way you'd get into Rendlesham Hall. It was a big mansion that um, it was privately owned, but then they eventually sold it during World War I. Apparently, it was used as a infirmary, and then they were using it for inebriates. It was
Hmm.
like a home for people who have drug problems and alcohol.
Treatment center. Kind of a
Yeah,
treatment center. Okay.
yeah, but they called it an inebriate.
Hmm.
So, so I was thinking one of the thoughts that went through my mind is that this guy may have, I don't know, jumped the fence or whatever, and was went to get some alcohol or whatnot, and then got really and drowned in the pond. I mean, you know, this is some of the things that you think about, but apparent, but it really scared the hell out of me. And So that was one of my first paranormal things, but it made it really difficult to work around that particular area because it's like he knew and I knew that he was there and he wanted to torment me. And
Hmm.
I drew a picture of him a long time ago. I have that in my book too. And
I don't know where I remember this from, but somebody else I talked to, and it wasn't Jim Penniston, but somebody else that we interviewed said that Rendlesham Forest is kind of a weird place to begin with. And it kind of sounds like maybe you're validating that.
yeah. The Suffolk County over in England is first thing you learn when you get to the base. You learn that you are in the most haunted county in the world,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of science behind a lot of what's going on. For instance, there was this exercise. Not exercise. It was a project called Cobra Mist that occurred over by, I think it was Orford Ness. And it
That's
was,
where the lighthouse is, right?
yeah. And what happened was, um, there was it made a sound, a pitch, and they couldn't stabilize it or something like that. But I really think that that feeling that I had, the heaviness of the weight, I truly think that that was caused by the Cobra Mist, and that some people are just really sensitive to because they were playing around with radar jamming and um, doing stuff that would go
Hmm.
out to the stratosphere and over the what's it go over the horizon radar and I just know that. I think that was a big part of it, but I had no idea about this Cobra Mist until decades later. You
You
know, I
sound
just,
like you're a pretty intuitive person too, so you
yeah.
might pick up on that.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, it got to a point I lost my stamina. Now I'm a 19-year-old kid. 19-year-old kids do not lose their stamina. I
Yeah.
mean, I had a hard time standing, getting up. I was like, where? I mean, it was really disconcerting for me. You know, trying to figure out what's going on. I started putting on a lot of weight, and it was just I wasn't me. It was like I was changing. Um, and then there was East Gate. If anyone knows of any place that's scary, it's East Gate.
And
Uh,
why is that scary?
well,
Or why was it scary, I
yeah.
guess?
Well, I just want to share this is that Larry Warren, he wrote a book with Peter Robbins, Left at Eastgate.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, the first time I heard about it, I thought, yeah, I was left at Eastgate, left alone. We
Mhm.
used to have to, and when we first got there, we had to work a midnight shift there. And there you're sitting in this little, um, it looks like a telephone booth, kind of a shack, just this old wooden shack, and it didn't hold any heat. And over in England, it gets really, really freaking cold. It's like I yeah, that the cold would go right down to your bones, and especially with the dampness, and then the fog would roll in. And at the time, there wasn't a blast wall that you couldn't see. You could actually see the whole runway when I first got there. And then when right about the time I was getting ready to leave, they built this wall, so right in front of the gate shack, so you couldn't see the runway, which I thought was what nerve. I mean, there wasn't much to see anyway, and but the road was it was a perimeter road that ran parallel with the runway at RAF Woodbridge. Now, RAF Woodbridge had been during World War II, was a crash base
Hmm.
because it's so close to the North Sea that it's, coming back from Germany or whatnot, they could uh, crash. and because it was considered a really long runway. So I would stand there and often, it was really scary. I mean, you would see, behind you, especially at midnight shift, the forest seemed really foreboding. It's like the last place you want to be. I'd look off to the off base where the cars would come, and I could see a house, and I could see lights on. So sometimes that gave me a little bit of comfort. And but there was one time I was sitting in the gate shack. It was about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was trying to keep awake. And I all of a sudden I felt something was behind me,
Hmm,
and it was a gray. And
hmm,
the reason I kind of know like the height wise is because when you sit down, the window comes up from your waist and goes up to the ceiling. Um, and and this gray told me, "Don't turn around. I don't want you to be scared." And I said, "I'm not going to turn around because I
hmm.
don't want to be scared. I really don't." And so it was kind of a nice thing that he didn't want to scare me. And
Is this a creature that you actually saw with your eyes, or you just sensed their presence?
it was like the mind's eye.
Hmm.
Yeah, yes. Several things happened that it was more of the mind's eye, but then I talked to other people and they've had similar experiences that, yeah, I don't know why it, well, maybe I do know. Maybe it has something to do with fear. They don't want us to be afraid. And next thing you know, we take our weapon out and we start shooting. Or,
Which would not be good, probably.
right. So, um, so that was, and all these little things that happened over at Ivy Lodge Gate with the crazy man and now the gray. And I couldn't tell anybody. I knew I couldn't tell anybody because it was too over the top. And I
Hmm.
was like, "Well, fine, And then several months later, I mean, all of this happened throughout the first year and a half that I was there. And I I was there was a colonel who had he he participated in an air show, and I think it was at Chicksands, and he uh flew a little bit low, and apparently they said there was somebody left like a pen or something like that inside the engine area, so that whatever happened, he lost control of the A-10, and he started cartwheeling across the forest over by their forest, not Rendlesham Forest, a different forest. And he ejected, but he ejected going down, going
Hmm.
down instead of going up, because he was cartwheeling. And so there was a time it happened during um, a swing shift, and it was about 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, and I'm standing at the East Gate, thinking, not really thinking much of anything, and I turn around, and behind me I see a colonel, and with my eyes, and he's not wearing a hat. Now, a lot of these guys that I was working with were would would give me crap for a lot of things. One thing, I'm responsible for somebody if they're not wearing their hat on duty. If you're in uniform, they'll say, Rehfeldt, why didn't you tell him to put his hat on?
Hmm.
So I looked at him, and I could see that he was wearing a pilot suit, and I could see that he was smoking a cigarette, and I could see that he was a full bird colonel, which is like one notch below a general. And all I could think of is, I can't go up to a colonel and tell him put your hat on, please? So I'm like freaking out, like, how am I gonna do this, And I turn around when I get ready, I finally get the gumption, I get ready, I turn around, he's gone. And I'm thinking that's really weird because there's a fence behind us, but in order for him to go to get around me, he had to go onto the perimeter road. And then there's still fences on one side. On the other side of the road is, as I said, it was a grassy area and a runway. So, so I had full view of, where this guy went. I mean, maybe he just took off and whatever. But I could go in the middle of the road and look down the road and see if he's where he is roughly walking down the road. And he wasn't
So
there.
were you seeing a ghost?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I saw it was Colonel, what is his name again? Colonel Thompson, Tommy
Hmm.
Thompson. And I described him many years later in the 90s. And his daughter reached out to me and said, that's my dad.
Hmm.
So, I mean, again, it's these little nuggets that people that validate certain things for me. And I feel,
Right.
it makes me feel a little better about it because, I don't want to say that, oh, wow, you know, you're losing it, Like this one guy, Kevin Conde would say something like, I don't know what kind of Kool-Aid you're drinking. So he passed away recently. So, but he was a prankster.
Mhm.
And so those were two of the things that happened at Eastgate. And then
Let,
one
let me
day,
ask let me ask one other question here. It seems to me that, and this was not necessarily known at the time, but was it likely that both of the bases that were there, you were at Bentwaters, were there nuclear weapons
yes.
uh, at both
Yeah.
places?
Yeah,
Okay.
it started out. Now, I was technically stationed at RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge because I
Okay.
worked at both bases, but I lived on RAF Bentwaters. Um, but they had recently, because this is a good segue actually, they had recently upgraded, renovated the weapons storage area for the nuclear bombs in 1978, 77, 78. And they put a lot of money into it. When I got there, the first thing they did is they told me I had to stand outside the weapons storage area at Bentwaters. Now, the one they renovated was at RAF Woodbridge, right? If you jump the fence, you'd be in Rendlesham Forest. And I I ended up so anyway, so they upgraded it. When I first got there, they told me to stand facing the away from the road, and because they were moving all the nuclear bombs from RAF Woodbridge to
Mhm.
Bentwaters. And then they would have non-munitions over at Woodbridge. Now, one day now here's the other thing. If you worked in law enforcement, you were not classified under, uh, let me just put it this way. I could not work in the weapons storage area because I was not technically security. I was law enforcement. So I didn't have the credential to be able to
Mhm.
work in these areas. So the first time I ever was in the weapons storage area was in 2000 after the base closed. And I thought, so this is what it's like, you know. But it was just kind of interesting because I would actually have to guard the non-munition over at Bentwaters, which was right beside the weapons storage area. But all the guys were there, and I was kind of in my little world by myself. And so anyway, so this day, now this is about a year or so after I've gotten there, and guarding uh, the RAF Woodbridge. We also call it a bomb dump. And so I'm in there and it's raining, it's cold, it's the same old thing. But we get building check sheets all the time, and and I like to do things right. So I'm a good little doobie that way. I'm going to go check my locks, and I'm walking about 20 feet from the gate shack, this little shack that was in there. And all of a sudden there was a flash in my mind, and it was this 7 foot tall um, praying mantis, muscular
Wow.
praying mantis. And he said, "Don't go." And I immediately said to myself, "I'm going back to my gate chat." So I went back to my gate chat. And interestingly, another to corroborate this was with Linda. How I'm trying to think of her name.
Linda Moulton Howe.
Yeah, yeah. She told me that there was mantids there.
Mm,
And I said, and I told her, I said, well, yeah, yeah,
you
that was
saw
not
one.
in my mind,
Mm,
but it's just, yeah, it was really disturbing. I mean, I didn't want to see him or her, but he looked like he was pacing in my mind, and he looked like really he was trying to figure something out. So I kind of wonder if they had actually renovated RAF Woodbridge bomb dump for them, not for us.
mm.
That we were there, that we would do some things on the top level, but then if there was anything underground, I don't know. I'm just speculating.
So what? That's kind of interesting. So this renovation that you're talking about might have been for non-human and creatures that were non-human
Yeah,
intelligence rather
yeah.
than the military. Interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, I also think that there's a possibility that there is a lot of activity with the Greys and with these other beings because of the nuclear weapons. I
Hmm.
think that they're worried about the way we use weapons. I mean, we're pretty violent society, that kind of thing. It's like they look at us like we're kids with matches.
Right.
Don't play with it. Stop that.
I think I would tend to agree with them.
Yeah. And because, I think our planet is very valuable. I think it's a little gem out there. And I think a lot of other beings from other places don't want us to screw it up. So
Hmm.
anyway, that's just my thought on it. And so So this was another thing that I had to bury. I just didn't want to deal with it because I was really treated poorly with my supervisors, and um, they I think a lot of them would leave me out on a gate shack, and if I needed a bathroom break, they wouldn't give me a bathroom break just to be mean.
Hmm.
It was really petty, really, and it wasn't all the sergeants or the NCOs. There was just a handful, but there was a real negative energy on the whole base. I mean, it was like people were sarcastic. It's like if I could shove you or trip you or make you look a certain way, then we're going to do it. So it was a toxic environment, and it got to the point. Now I'm in like 79 heading into 1980, and I got to the point where I just wanted to survive. I
Hmm.
didn't want to do, I didn't want to question anything. I didn't want to say anything because the commander would railroad you out. Major Ziegler, he would railroad you out. He would, we had uh, two buildings that they housed people they worked in security on the security side, and they were now, they called them snaps.
Hmm.
And they snapped out, they lost their mind, and and these guys would, I mean, one guy stole an M16 and then threw it out into the North Sea, and another person. I mean, it was just a lot of crazy stuff. One guy shot his weapon off at East Gate. The reason I knew that is I was on the other back gate at Bentwaters. I was at the Butley gate, and they said, "Rehfeldt, what are you doing?" And I was like, "No, I'm not doing anything." And they hang up, and now I'm like trying to figure out what was going on. And they said someone, shot their weapon off. Another guy burned there was a metal trash can filled with paint rags, and he had a lighter, and he decided to light it up, and so and it happened to be maybe about 10 feet, 20 feet from the petroleum area, the POL site.
Wow.
And he was like a really soft-spoken guy, but I mean, when I started seeing all these guys doing all these kinds of things, and it just made me realize that a lot of them had it. They couldn't stand it. It's like they had to get out of there. I mean, there was definitely I got to get the hell out of here. I mean, I'd seen
So,
a lot.
so that's what you got me wondering about, Lori. Uh, did this environment just attract people that had a lot of trouble, or was there something about the environment that caused these people to act the way they did? What are your thoughts about that?
I agree with the latter. I agree that there was something about the place that was influencing, a lot of this bad behavior. I mean, it was hard on the way that for I mean, we didn't have much in regard to any kind of entertainment. It's not like we could sit in front of a TV set and watch whatever for stay up late, watch TV or something like that. We didn't have that. And if we wanted a television in our room, we had to pay for a license, like a tax thing.
Hmm.
So you had to pay, yeah, we had to pay road tax, we had to pay all these taxes. And so it was just really, it was people were getting really bored. So one of the biggest things that they would do was to go to the class six store and buy a lot of alcohol.
Hmm.
There was a lot of drinking going on, but the young guys too, I mean, I get it. I mean, I drank several times there that really, I got pretty wasted. But, I just think though it got to the point where it was over the top excessive. We had this one guy, and this is how strange it was. He was a technical sergeant, which is, to make tech sergeant, you've probably been in the military about 10 years, roughly, or 8, 10 years, something like that. And he was living in the dormitory, and he went into the one of the Quonset huts held the what we call the sound center, which is where you can buy stereo equipment and you could buy all this stuff. I mean, that was the other thing. Most everyone, including me, we all had really fancy stereos by the time we got ready to leave there. Um, and but he broke into a window that was up near the roof. There was a big tree there, so it was kind of private, but he was able to get in, and he crawled through the ceiling tiles and it went into the sound center and stole a lot of equipment. And we learned about that somebody had broken into the sound center the day before. And I remember my supervisor saying, he's going to come back. And I remember thinking, why would somebody come back if they stole something and do. So they had their eye on the sound center. And then it turned out I he did come back. And I told the other guys, I said, I'll keep patrolling around all the other places while you guys are focused on this one area. And then when I was done, I went into uh, the law enforcement desk, and there sitting on the ledge was a harpoon. I thought, oh my God, could you imagine chasing after this guy through the ceiling tiles and he harpoons you. I mean,
Wow.
I'm thinking this is really bizarre. So, but a lot of these things would happen continuously. It was, there were times it was really, really boring. I mean, um, but it was also a lot of, you'd start wondering what's going on. What would make this guy do this? So I had to go to his room with another law enforcement specialist, and we had to check to see what was in there. And it looked like he took all his clothes and shoved them in the corner or something. And his room looked like the sound center. He had, you open up the drawers, there weren't any clothes in the drawers. There were all these cassettes that he had that he made, like thousands of them. And all I could think about, and of course I have a dry sense of humor. So I looked at the other law enforcement guy. I said, I think he likes music a lot.
Possibly, huh?
Yeah, I got a feeling. But now this guy is now going to Fort Leavenworth. He just destroyed his whole career.
Hmm.
And it was just shocking to see somebody that would do that. I mean, some with the younger people, you'd think, oh, well, they're kind of reckless a little bit, but I think a lot of the young people that got out before their time had a lot to do with. There was just they were under the magnifying glass of Major Ziegler, and he, they would have different law enforcement guys go in there and plant some marijuana or something like that in there, just to get rid of them. So I mean, there was a lot of that going on too. It was just dirty. And
So, this is a question that's just going through my mind. Before we started the recording, I told you that we had done a show with Jim Peniston, and your story is not Jim Peniston's story, totally different, but you got me wondering about the extent to which Rendlesham Forest and the experiences you had in that physical area produced things like uh, what happened to Jim Peniston and others. So, what do you
Mhm.
think about that? The environment kind of drawing in UFOs, all this other
Mhm.
paranormal kind of things. Is that, am I barking up the right tree or wrong tree?
Well, I think you're right on the money. I think what happened is that each of us had separate experiences that it was almost as if it was designed for us individually to see,
Mm.
or to feel, or, in the case of, the gray behind me or something. I mean, I talked to one guy who told me that he was driving the Metro van, and we had heard about this woman who rides a bicycle and she doesn't have a face,
Mm.
kind of creepy. And he's driving the Metro van. Everyone in the back, there's no windows in the back, so everyone's sitting on the floor of the Metro van. And the driver, he's got the mirror and he's looking out, and he could see this woman, riding a bicycle, and he thought that was really weird. And then he noticed, it's like he took another look and noticed she didn't have a face.
Wow.
And then he was like, holy shit, excuse me, holy mackerel. And, and he starts driving. Now he's driving the back road to go from Woodbridge to Bentwaters. And it's this one road that kind of cuts through uh, at the forest, but it's a pretty much like a straightaway. He started going, he said he started going 50, 60 miles an hour on this narrow road. So he's trying to get away from it. He looks back, she's
Mhm.
right up to him with it.
Wow.
And he's like, this is, yeah. And he couldn't tell anybody about it. If someone had told me recently, maybe a couple of years ago, and 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 I had heard that story that others had experienced it, with that. I'm like, I don't know, the mantid or the lady without the face. but she looked like somebody, the way she dressed and the bicycle, she looked like somebody from the early 1930s or during
Mm.
the time of Dorothy of the Wizard of Oz, kind of wearing that kind of an outfit.
Okay.
Um,
Have
and
you
then
ever heard of Have you ever heard of Opus?
what's that?
OPUS? You ever heard of Opus? OPUS?
I
Opus is
what is that?
Opus is something I used to belong to. Stands for the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. And the
Hmm,
reason that it exists is because some of the things that you're talking about, people have a hard time sharing those things with other people because oftentimes the reaction is, well, it's just crazy. That can't be
mhm,
happening.
yeah.
But Opus is an organization that recognizes that reality is a lot weirder than we think it is, and that you need to have a place that you can tell these kind of stories about. And
Yeah.
some of the stories, some things that happen can be very traumatizing. So, as we're
Oh yeah.
talking about this, I'm thinking about Opus. So, just
Wow.
wondered if you were familiar with that.
No, no, but maybe after this we'll
Yeah,
share
I can
more, more
I can
information.
send you a link
Yeah.
if you'd like.
Oh,
So
that's great.
let's go
But
back to what else went on at Bentwaters with you.
well, then the next one, the next thing that happened was it was February of 1980, and I was on patrol. I was the lead patrol. I was with this guy on patrol, Keith Duffield, and it was a pretty slow night, and we went out to Eastgate to check the locks because now Eastgate was closed during the midnight shift. So it's about 3 in the morning. And so we go out and we, get out of, I'm still doing my thing, getting out of the truck, checking the lock. But it was really, really cold. So then I got back into the truck and I put the truck in reverse and pulled up beside the gate shack. So I'm still facing off base. I'm facing in the direction of the North Sea. And all of a sudden, we could see this light coming in. And it was coming from the North Sea. And I thought, that's interesting. Are we getting it looked like, could have been like a C-130 cargo plane. And I'm looking, and then I keep looking over at the runway to see if the blue lights would go on. And then, now I'm thinking about, well, one of the jobs we have to do is customs. So, because this could be an aircraft that's coming from uh, Ramstein or from, we had Simbach. Simbach was, we had a shuttle that went from Simbach to Woodbridge. And so, but the lights weren't going on. And now this light, it's about maybe about, oh, it's 50 yards away. It stops in midair. And then it goes up, down, left, right, and it starts to pulsate and then it breaks into three pieces and does an arc going down on the runway and then shoots up in the air and didn't make any noise. And I'm looking at Keith and he's looking at me. We're like, what the hell is that? It's like, oh my God. And all I could think about was I have to, now this is one thing that I have to report because it flew into military space. I couldn't just not do it. So I was uncomfortable with it. So I handed the radio over to Keith. I said, you better report this because I didn't want,
Because you didn't want to.
I knew the headache I knew how bad, and it was. I mean, after it happened, it was like, oh yeah, Rehfeldt seeing UFOs.
Mhm.
So I, um, I got on the radio, and then the desk sergeant, Alan Cohen, he said to me, he said, can you go into the um, when I started explaining what we had seen, he shut me down to say, let's get on the phone at East Gate and you can tell me. So, so I went into the East Gate, the shack, got on the phone and told him, and he recommended that I go over to the air tower to see if they got anything on radar. So that's a good idea. So I was really happy about that, that he was working with me instead of being, a butthead. And so I get there and I'm walking up these metal steps that are on the outside of the air tower. And now I'm pounding on the door. The door's locked, so I'm pounding on it. And it gets to a point that I'm kicking the door because the door was so heavy that you couldn't really hear the knocking. So
Hmm.
I'm kicking the door. And finally the guy comes to the door. He's an young airman. Well, we were all young, but he came to the door, and he looked disheveled. He looked like I just woke him up, and I was so frustrated. And I did ask him, did you see this? Da, 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 da. Did you have anything on? And he said, no, but it sounds like it was afterburners from maybe a British fighter jet. And I said, well, with that, there's a sonic boom, with the, you just, you just can't do that without it making noise. This didn't make any noise whatsoever. And so I left there. He's like, well, I don't know what to tell you, that kind of thing. So I walked out. Keith is in the car. And I'm walking down the steps. Now I'm looking out because I'm so frustrated. I'm thinking about what it could be, all this stuff. And I look out onto the horizon. And it was the first time, it was so subtle that I didn't notice it right away, but it was becoming daybreak. It was like the sky was opening up. It was getting a little brighter. And I thought to myself, that's really, really weird because the last time when we were in the truck checking the gate, it was 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Now it's like 6:30 or something. And
sounds like missing time.
yeah, and that's what I told him. I said, do you see this, daylight? And he's like, oh my God, thinking what, we both realized that something happened. We're like, this is really, talk about mind bending or whatnot. And so I actually left Bentwaters and Woodbridge, did what they called a PCS, Permanent Changes Station, on December 15th. This was about 2 weeks before the Rendlesham Forest incident happened. I call mine the East Gate incident.
Hmm.
So, but now people are looking at it as mine is kind of a precursor to what happened there. And but I found it really interesting that Jim Pennison walked around near the craft and he um, he saw those glyphs
And
and
then he gets a binary download. That's
yeah,
pretty
yeah, that
freaky too.
I read his book and I thought it was really, really good. His book, The Enigma.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've got that book. I've got that book. Yeah.
yeah. And the one thing that I found interesting, so I got really excited when at the advent of the internet, I was at work and I decided to type in RAF Bentwaters. And the first thing that came out, now this is in the 1990s, and I haven't talked about any of the stuff that I've just shared with you.
Hmm.
And I, I saw, first thing I saw was left at East Gate. And I said, I couldn't believe it. I mean, no one knew about Eastgate unless you were over in England because it was just like a lot of paranormal stuff happening there. I mean, it's a hotbed. I really
Hmm.
think that during the Cobra Mist, it actually opened something up and it has this energy and most of it's negative energy pouring into this place. But I think it could also be like dimensional or something. So, it's just really bizarre. But they have other things going on, energy lines, ley lines,
Yeah,
that
okay.
cross over the area and how it matches up with the pyramids and all this other stuff.
One thing that fascinates me are these spots, and I'm thinking of places like the Skinwalker Ranch. And
Hmm.
actually, I'm familiar with a couple places here in Washington State where all this weird stuff happens. And it's like, why is this spot a certain spot that attracts all this? It's like almost a paranormal Disneyland kind of thing. Sounds like
Yeah.
maybe Rendlesham Forest might be similar.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Rendelsham Forest or just that whole area. I mean, all around it. And but but it was interesting that when I first found out about it, I was in touch with I did buy the book Left at Eastgate, and then I was in touch with both Peter and with Larry, and Larry's been a friend since. I mean, we just I definitely understand what he went through because he's also intuitive and creative. Now, the one thing that I found interesting too was one of the glyphs that Jim Peniston had was a triangle with two circles on it. One circle is kind of on the outside of the triangle, and one is kind of a little bit in um, part of the triangle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, that that glyph, I hadn't seen it because in again back in the 90s, I was drawing a picture of East Gate, and because I was so this opened up a whole new world to me, especially to corroborate and to be able to also feel like I wasn't alone, that they
Hmm.
had these experiences. And so I did reach out to John Burroughs and Jim Peniston and those guys. John's actually been on my podcast, God,
Oh,
Aliens, a Cup of Coffee, but I haven't been able to get Jim on. And but yeah, but I
well,
do.
one thing that's also this reminds me about is I believe both John Burroughs and Jim Peniston had health issues that arose from their exposure to
Mhm.
some of these weird things. Have you
Oh, yeah.
had any health issues?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. Not really, not really.
Okay,
I yeah. I mean, I listen. No, I haven't. Yeah,
okay.
I didn't know that Jim had any health issues.
I think in my, and I don't want to speak for him, but it
Right.
seems like in our discussion, he did talk about some issues.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, I don't want to keep you for the rest of the night. You probably have something else to do besides talk to me. Is there anything else you want to kind of leave us with? Tell us again your book, the title of your book, and when that's coming out.
Yeah. Okay. The book is called Rendlesham Lone Ranger, and I'm the Lone Ranger. I think
Well,
everyone is the Lone Ranger in this book. I have a Facebook page called the Rendlesham Lone Ranger UFO sightings. And I've had a lot of support from a lot of the guys that I worked with over in England. It was really nice to be able to reach out to these people that I knew during that time frame. And to me, it was incredible that this story would be so large and it would be people that I knew. It wasn't like me watching what's going on with all these other cops. It's like we're all kind of in this web that we're all together. And my story actually starts out where it's kind of a memoir, but it's not written. I've got a lot of dialogue in there, which I think makes it really interesting. So I think what I'm trying to do is to piece together to people, I've had some of these gifts or these things happen to me when I was a child. So some of the things that, and I explain some of these things, and I explain it through my, because when I'm 7, 8 years old and I'm going to my mom and telling her, you're not going to believe I saw this really beautiful statue of Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the school cafeteria. And she was like, and my mom immediately, I'm thinking statue. My mom immediately calls, enter what's that? Makes an Atlantic phone call to grandma in Ireland saying
Mhm.
Lori had a vision, and because I couldn't figure out it was there, and then I walked past another set of double doors and it was gone. So just as an example that, these types of things have happened to me. Um, and I think that people who tend to be like, I think Larry's the same way. I mean, he's had similar things happen when he was younger, and it just kind of um, you know, continued to evolve. And yeah, so it's an interesting story. And this is actually this is going to be book one, because I really end the story at February, even before I left there. And my next book's going to start after that, because the book is it was long enough, and I do have photos in it so people can see where I was. The artwork on the cover is fabulous. Um, I'm really impressed with what they did.
Well,
So
be sure to send us a copy of the face.
definitely.
Yeah, and then we'll put it on our website.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, Lori, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I've waited, we've just taken a long time
Oh,
for this to come about, but I really have
hmm.
enjoyed the conversation.
Well, maybe next time we can do something where with your group that you have, that
Yeah,
if they
actually,
want to.
we're doing I do a class. Well, it's a group, but the last 7 weeks, I've been doing a UFO class, and you would be a natural one for that, or maybe just a class on the paranormal. So I'll keep you in the loop about that as well. As
Okay,
well.
sounds good.
Okay,
Well, I
thanks again.
really enjoyed your company. You got a really good, you ask really good questions, and I appreciate that a lot. And yeah, I think your podcast is very nice.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So I'm going to end this now, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds good. Bye-bye.
All right, bye, Lori.